What if Shang-Chi is not just a fighter in Doomsday, but the key to ending it? I started thinking about this the moment I rewatched Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and something didn't sit right with me. The Ten Rings were never fully explained. Yes, we were told they were ancient, powerful, and possibly alien, but that explanation felt incomplete. Marvel doesn't leave things that vague unless they are planning something massive. And when I started connecting this to a potential Avengers-level threat like Doomsday, everything suddenly began to make sense in a much bigger way. I noticed how the rings were sending a signal, something unknown, something distant. That moment wasn't just a tease, it felt like a warning. And if Doomsday is the level of destruction we're heading toward, then I think Shang-Chi isn't just part of the story. He might actually be the reason the story exists. Because what if those rings are not just weapons but keys? Keys to something far older than anything we've seen in the MCU so far. When I started connecting the dots, I realized that the Ten Rings don't behave like normal technology or magic. They adapt, they evolve with the user. That's not something we've seen even with artifacts like the Infinity Stones. It almost feels like the rings are alive, or at least responsive to a deeper force. And that's where my theory begins to take shape. What if the Ten Rings are linked to a cosmic entity that predates even the multiverse itself? Now think about Doomsday. If Marvel is building toward a catastrophic event, something that can rival or even surpass Avengers Endgame, then they need a force that is not just powerful, but unstoppable. And that's where Shang-Chi comes in. I think the Ten Rings are directly connected to that force, either as a weapon against it, or worse, as something that can awaken it. I started to imagine a scenario where the signal from the rings wasn't just a beacon, but a call. Something out there has been waiting, and the use of the rings has finally alerted it. This could be a dormant celestial-level entity, or even something beyond what we understand as celestials. And if that's the case, then Shang-Chi unknowingly becomes the trigger for Doomsday itself. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Shang-Chi isn't like other heroes. He doesn't rely on technology, and he doesn't have a traditional superhero origin. His strength comes from balance control, discipline, and understanding. That's why I think he's the only one who can truly master the Ten Rings. And if the rings are connected to this larger threat, then Shang-Chi becomes the only person capable of stopping it. I also started thinking about how the rings changed when Shang-Chi used them. They became more fluid, more aligned with his fighting style. That wasn't just a visual upgrade, it was symbolic. It showed that the rings respond to intention, not just power. And if Doomsday is something that thrives on chaos and destruction, then Shang-Chi's balance might be the perfect counter. Now imagine this playing out in a future Avengers film. The world is collapsing, timelines are breaking, and every major hero is struggling to hold things together. And in the middle of all this chaos, Shang-Chi discovers the true purpose of the Ten Rings. Not as weapons, but as a seal, something designed to contain this ancient force. And by using them, he unknowingly weakens that seal. That's when everything clicks for me. Shang-Chi's role isn't just to fight. It's to fix what has been broken. He becomes the bridge between humanity and something far greater. And unlike characters who rely on brute strength, Shang-Chi has to make a choice: use the rings to destroy the threat, or risk everything to restore balance. I think this is where Marvel can take his character to another level. Instead of just being part of the team, Shang-Chi becomes the center of the resolution. Because while others are fighting the battle, he's solving the problem, and that's a much more powerful role. Another thing I noticed is how little we know about the origin of the rings. That mystery is intentional. It gives Marvel the freedom to tie them into something much bigger, like the foundation of the multiverse, or even a force that exists outside of time. And if that's true, then Shang-Chi is holding something that even beings like Doctor Strange might not fully understand. This also creates an interesting dynamic. Imagine Doctor Strange trying to analyze the rings and realizing they don't follow the rules of magic or science. That would immediately set Shang-Chi apart. He's not just another hero, he's connected to something unknown, something unpredictable. And that unpredictability is what makes his role so important in Doomsday. Because when everything else fails, the unknown becomes the only hope. Shang-Chi represents that unknown. He's not bound by the same limitations as other heroes, and that gives him an edge. As I kept thinking about this, I realized that Shang-Chi's journey has always been about identity. Understanding who he is, where he comes from, and what he stands for. And in a story like Doomsday, that journey reaches its peak. Because now, it's not just about him, it's about the fate of everything. I can picture a moment where Shang-Chi has to face the true nature of the rings. Maybe they start to overpower him, or maybe they reveal a truth that changes everything he thought he knew. And in that moment, he has to decide whether to embrace their power or reject it. That decision becomes the turning point of the entire story. Because if he chooses power, he risks becoming part of the problem, but if he chooses balance, he becomes the solution. And that's what makes his role so unique. I also think Marvel might explore the idea that the rings are not meant to be used alone. Maybe they were originally part of a larger system, something that required multiple users or a specific alignment to function properly. And Shang-Chi is the first person in centuries to unlock their true potential. That would explain why the signal was activated, not because the rings were used, but because they were used correctly. And that's what triggered the arrival of this larger threat. Now imagine the final act. Everything is falling apart, and the only way to stop Doomsday is to use the rings in a way no one has ever done before. Shang-Chi steps forward, fully understanding the risk, and instead of fighting, he does something unexpected. He connects with the force behind the rings. This isn't a battle of strength, it's a battle of will. And Shang-Chi wins not by overpowering the enemy, but by restoring balance, by proving that control is stronger than chaos. That's the kind of ending that would redefine his character. He's not just a hero, he's a guardian. Someone who protects not just the world, but the balance of the universe itself. And when I look at everything we've seen so far, it all points in that direction. The mystery of the rings, the signal, the way they respond to Shang-Chi, it's all building towards something bigger. So when Doomsday finally arrives, I don't think Shang-Chi will be in the background. I think he'll be at the center of it all, holding the one thing that can either destroy everything or save it. And honestly, that's what makes this theory so exciting. Because it turns Shang-Chi from an underrated hero into one of the most important characters in the entire MCU. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep theories like this.